Hola estudiantes, hoy vamos a repasar el presente. Today we are reviewing the present tense. Remember that the present tense is used to describe events that are happening now. Before we review how to conjugate verbs into the present tense, let's talk about what the present tense conjugations actually mean. In Spanish, there are 3 different meanings of the present tense. Let's look at a verb. For example, to talk, or hablar in español. If we put hablar into the yo form of hablo, it means 3 things. It could mean I talk, I do talk, and I am talking. Hablo means 3 different things. I talk, I do talk, I am talking. This could be true for any verb in the present tense, having the same 3 meanings, like you dance, you do dance, you are dancing. Now let's talk about how we conjugate verbs, and we're going to start with los regulares, or our regular verbs. Remember that a verb is a word that ends in AR, ER, or IR. And if we see this AR, ER, IR ending attached to a verb, it means it is an infinitive, or an unconjugated verb. So the first thing we need to do when we want to conjugate them is to get rid of the AR, ER, or IR ending, just like that. And then we will attach the correct ending based off of the subject of our sentence. So let's review what our AR endings are. The yo form uses O. As is the ending for the to form. A for él, ella, usted. Amos for nosotros. An for ellos, ellas, ustedes. O, as, a, amos, an. ER verbs use a different set of endings. O for the yo form. Es for the to form. A for the él, ella, usted. Hemos for nosotros. En for ellos, ellas, ustedes. Lastly, we have our IR verbs. IR verbs are actually very similar to ER verbs. Again, we're going to use O for our yo form, es for to, A for él, ella, usted, hemos for nosotros, en for ellos, ellas, ustedes. The only difference between ER verb endings and IR verb endings is the nosotros form. Instead of hemos, we're going to use hemos. Repitan. O, as, a, amos, an. O, es, e, hemos, en. O, es, e, hemos, en. These are our regular verb endings. Now, let's move into los irregulares. Just like the preterite, the present tense has a lot of irregulars. Tomorrow in class, you are going to receive a yellow packet that has all of the different irregular verbs of the present tense. Today, we are going to talk about 2 of these groups. The first group are the verbs that mean to be. What are the verbs that mean to be? If you said ser and estar, you are 100% correct. We're going to talk about how we conjugate them, and then we'll talk about the differences in meaning. So, what makes verbs irregular? When I say a verb is irregular, that means that it does not follow the same conjugation pattern as the AR, ER, and IR verb endings. So our first irregular verb is going to be ser. We are going to use soy, eres, es, somos, and son. Soy, eres, es, somos, son. These are our irregular conjugations of ser. Let's move on to estar. Estoy, estás, está, estamos, están. Part of what makes estar irregular is the fact that it has accent marks over its endings in the to, él, ella, usted, and ellos, ellas, ustedes form. It is very important that you remember to include these endings. Again, the conjugations of estar in the present tense are estoy, estás, está, estamos, están. So what's the difference in meaning here? At the beginning of the year, we learned these two acronyms, doctor and place. Doctor we use with ser, and it stands for description, occupation, characteristic, time, origin, and relationship. For estar, we learned place, position, location, action, condition, emotion. We also learned a little rhyme to help us remember estar, and that is, for how you feel and where you are, always use the verb estar. We see ser as a more permanent state, and estar is much more temporary. Now that we've talked about ser and estar, which is a review from Spanish 1 and the beginning of the year, we're going to move on to our next group of irregular verbs of the present tense. And this is group 4. As you see, we're not going to go in order of our packet. We're going to jump around a little bit. Group 4 only has 2 verbs in it. And these verbs, their conjugations rhyme. So, let's review what they are real quick. Ir, which means to go, conjugates like this. Voy, vas, va, vamos, van. Voy, vas, va, vamos, van. These are the irregular conjugations of ir in the present tense. Now, let's look at the conjugations of dar, which means to give, in the present. Doy, das, da, damos, dan. As you can see, if I zoom out, ir and dar have essentially the same conjugations. The only difference is the first letter. Voy, doy, vas, das, va, da, vamos, damos, van, dan. These conjugations rhyme, which is why we call group 4 our rhyming conjugations. Let's recap what we've talked about today. La recapitulación. Today, we have talked about the regular present tense verb endings for AR, ER, and IR verbs. We also have talked about los irregulares. We talked about group 1, ser and estar, both of which mean to be, and we've talked about group 4 verbs, ir and dar. Ir means to go, dar means to give. It is extremely important that you know what these verbs mean and how they conjugate, as you may or may not have a surprise assessment later this week over them. Adios!